Dave Tosh, Executive Director, Wenatchee Valley Senior Activity Center, and today I'm joined by Russ Alman. Many of you have probably heard about his name. He is a producer of the Vibrant Living and Vibrant Motion TV series that have been in production now for a year and a half or so, and I think we've had a lot of good success with all that. Russ's background is also in technology in general. He has worked with seniors in the past with trying to teach them things about computers and mobile devices, things of that nature. Also didn't mention that he is a co-owner of Digital Media Northwest, which is a local company here in town that's helping a lot of organizations with the social media, websites, and all things technology, actually. But today we're here to talk about internet security, and I know we've done a lot of programming on scams, and yes, mostly the scams are associated with telephone calls, but there's a whole nother matter associated with computers and mobile devices and passwords and things of that nature, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is helping to inform our viewing audience, particularly seniors, as to how to be careful with all this stuff so that you don't get hacked into on your computer and then have a lot of difficulty with bank accounts and other things. So, Russ, tell us a little more in general what the seniors should be watching out for and what they can do to help themselves with all this.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Well, first of all, you probably see a lot of stuff on TV right now, and in news articles online and even on social media where they talk about, there is a security breach with this company and 100,000 names were exposed, or phishing attack here or ransomware attack there, and that's all very disconcerting to people, and the media loves those things because it's dramatic, Yeah. But most security issues start with the individual, not with big companies as a whole. When a big company gets compromised, or when a individual user gets compromised, the vast majority of times when that happens, it's happening for the same reason, and that reason is passwords. And I've worked as an IT administrator for companies. I've also done one-on-one instruction with individuals and seniors as well, and it's the same issue. If you could have the best IT technology in the world as an IT administrator, but if your end users have bad passwords, they're still going to get in. The single most common reason for security breaches in any kind of computer network are bad passwords. And that's really the key to everything.
So we've been hearing, I know, in the news and what I read, you've got to change your passwords often. They shouldn't be associated with your name or your dog even, or your wife's name, what have you. And there are things out there like password managers that a lot of people they're probably afraid of, because it's also some technology.
Yeah, it's additional technology that you have to learn. That's part of what's intimidating about it. Most of them are pretty easy to use, but like you said, in a perfect world, every place that you use a password should be different. It should be complex. It should have, it should be fairly long and have a combination of upper and lowercase and numbers and symbols mixed together. They should all be unique, and you should change them regularly on every place. That's in a perfect world. In reality, none of us can do that because our heads would explode. right? But that's why password managers are there, is to take care of those details for you. So then instead of having to remember all of these different passwords for all these different places, you just have to remember how to get into your password manager. And that one you want to make sure that you change the credentials for on a regular basis. But even then, and this goes for any kind of passwords that you create. I mean, if you use a password manager, most of them have a way to generate passwords for you that you can use to save with different services. But you can also create your own, and they usually give you that option. And there are ways to create more secure passwords that are easier to remember. Mm-hmm. And especially if you're using a password manager, that's one of the things you want to do. So for example, one thing you can do is take a fairly long word, and it probably shouldn't be something that people can immediately associate you with, like your wife's name or something like that, because that information's all out there, and yeah. Hackers can use that information off. They can go to social media, find out all the common things that you say, and try and use those as passwords. So that's not a safe way. You want to use something that you don't normally use, but you can remember. One way to make it more difficult is to substitute numbers and characters for some of the letters in ways that make sense to you. So for example, you can use an @ sign instead of an A, right? Yeah. Or you can use a $ instead of an S. Yep. Or an exclamation point instead of an L. You know, things that visually look similar so you can remember it, and then use a fairly long word to do it. And if you look at it, it actually looks like it's a pretty difficult password to break. If you don't know the code that you have in your head, it would be useless to somebody. So that's one way you can do it. Another way is to use phrases, you know, something fairly long, like 30 or 40 characters minimum, that is a sentence or a phrase of something that you will remember that's not common knowledge. So it could be something like, I hated to eat broccoli until I was 14 years old. You know, who else knows that except maybe your parents, right? But I mean, that's long, right? It's a lot of characters. It's not something that's out there that people can access. And then for extra measure, you might just add a couple of, you know, exclamation points or an asterisk in there somewhere too. Because if you remember the phrase, you'll probably remember the things you stuck in it as well. You know, and so you can create fairly difficult passwords as a first line of defense. It's important to understand the analogy here with internet, not just internet and computer security. Most criminals, whether they're house burglars or car prowlers or cyber criminals, have the same mentality. They're not looking for hard targets, right? They're looking for the easy prey, right? They're looking for the open doors. You know, if you have a car prowler going through a parking lot, they're not going to go try and break into the cars that are locked. They're looking for unlocked cars, right? So they can snatch and grab. I mean, why put yourself at more risk when there's easy stuff to get, right? If you have a house burglar, they're going to case out the neighborhood, you know, and figure out the patterns of when people are coming or going, and and watch for them leaving doors open, and looking for opportunities to make it easy for them. So anything you can do to make it a little harder immediately makes you less likely to fall prey than anybody else. Yeah. And just, it's a matter of how many security measures you want to take and how safe you want to be.
Yeah, some of it, well, I think 80% plus of our population don't change their passwords at all. Mm-hmm. They're using the same one all the time for certain accounts. I know that a couple of the websites that I use where, a password's required, it forces you to change your password. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good thing.
And you can't use a previous one too,
right?
Which can be really frustrating.
I
But
know.
again, if you use a password manager,
Yeah.
it will take care of that for you, so you don't have to remember it every single time.
Or write it down somewhere and then you lose the piece of paper you wrote it on, or you can't find it, or what have you.
If you're going to write stuff down, you should be putting it in a safe security box too, and not just sitting on your desk.
Yeah.
That's not a good
Yeah.
place to save it.
But now we also have this thing about authentication, where if you have a mobile device, a lot of people have a choice of how they want to authenticate. Can you talk a
Sure.
little more about that?
So what we're talking about is called two-step verification, or multi-factor authentication is, I think, the MFA is the more common technical term for it. But the gist of it is that you can't just connect to a website or a service from a new device without some kind of challenge, right? So you could connect, you put in the password, that won't just get you in from a new device. In order to connect, you have to respond to a second factor, a second challenge. And that could be them sending you an email with a verification code. So only somebody that has access to the email can answer the challenge question.
You know,
Or sending you a text message with because you've registered your phone number with that account, so that they can send you a text with a code.
yeah.
That's better. And any time you have the option to use multi-factor authentication like that, you should always turn it on, because again, you're locking more doors that way. It's not fail-safe though, because if somebody has access to your email, it's just it's compromised the system, right? And there are ways to. It's harder to get to somebody's text messaging, but it's not impossible, and that's been known to happen too. But for most people, I mean, there are other options that go even a step further, but at least turning on two-factor authentication, whether it's by email or text messaging, is a big step up. And you should always use that option when it's available. All major services now, like Facebook, LinkedIn, Gmail, Hotmail, take your pick, they all have that option. Increasingly, I don't think they all require it at this point. They probably should. If they don't, they make the option available. And the other thing that they do is kind of force you to do it once in a while, whether you want to or not. So like if you're logging into your Gmail account from a new computer, they're going to challenge you. Yeah. They're going to send you an authentication to a secondary email address or to your phone number, whatever you have set up. That is two-step verification, but it's just not required every single time type of two-step. There's a couple of additional ways to do it. One is to subscribe to a third-party authentication service, and this is a little harder. So I understand that not everybody's going to do this. I've done this now. There are authentication apps that you can put on your phone. So for example, Google has Google Authenticator. Microsoft has their own, I forget what it's called, I think it's Microsoft Authenticator. It's similar. And basically you put an app on your phone and that makes your phone into a key, right? So you've registered that app with your credentials, with your authentication service. And so when you try to log into a website that you've registered with this, it now requires you to go into that app on your phone, launch the app, and then select the service that you're trying to log into, and then it gives you a rotating challenge code that changes every 30 seconds. And then you have to go put that in where you're trying to log into the device. So basically it's using your phone as a key, right? I found there are a number of services out there that do that independently, because to me, the problem is, say you have a Gmail account, now and you're using Google Authenticator, it's tied to your Google account. So, I mean, if your Google stuff gets compromised, your app could get compromised too. So what I prefer is using a third-party service. I use one called Authy, A-U-T-H-Y. You can find it online at authy.com. And you can register with them. You set up, set up a number of credentials of challenges to confirm your account. Once that's set up, then you make that your authentication service. And then when you set up two-step verification on different services, you can set it up through Authy, right? So then what happens is when you try to go to a new device, or anytime that service wants to challenge you, you have to open Authy and find that service and use a code. Part of the reason I like Authy is that you can set it up on multiple devices. With Google Authenticator, I believe you can only do it on one device. With Authy, you can set up more. So like if you have more than one phone, or if you have a phone and a tablet, you can register both devices so you don't have to go find the one device that you have access to. So that's an option. The most secure thing, and this is what a lot of corporate people do now, corporate IT people, is they'll actually give you a hardware key, right? It's a dongle that has to be plugged into your computer
It's
or
like
your
a
phone.
USB.
Yeah, I mean, it's a physical thing that has to be plugged in, that has your credentials on it, and if you don't have that key, you can't access.
Yeah.
That's the most secure way, but most people are not. Although you can go out, you can actually buy your own personal keys like that now for like under $50 and register them and use them like that. So it's possible to do that on a personal level too. It's just, but the key thing is that you want to use anything you can do to increase the levels of security is one step above what most other people are doing and making yourself less of a target.
We talked a little bit about passwords and the importance of passwords, and you also mentioned that there are password managers out there. Obviously, it's software, programs that you can acquire. And I know some of them charge a fee for that, and some of them are free. How would somebody go about and finding one of these services?
Sure. So there are, like you said, there are paid ones. There are some free ones. There are some freemium ones where they have a free version and then an upgraded version. Lastpass is very popular. I've heard of a number of people using that. I'm not sure that they still have a free version or not. I can't remember. It's not real expensive anyway. If you'd rather, and that way you get a little bit more polished experience. And it's also a third-party service. Which for some people would be a preference. If you use an Apple computer, Apple has their keychain, and that's basically, that is a password manager. Apple's actually was one of the pioneers in password management because they've had the keychain available for decades now. And that's gotten a lot easier to use. It's also tied to your iCloud account. So if you set up an account with Apple and all of your devices log into that account, they can all share the same password base, and that's all stored in your Apple account. So that's one way to do it. If you're a Windows user, if you have a Microsoft account, it does the same thing. So you can share your Microsoft passwords between devices. Personally, I use Google because I use Google Workspace, Google products for business. I have an Android phone. I use Chrome a lot. Yeah. And so Password Manager works with all of those things. So if I go to a website on my computer and save my password and pull up that same site on my phone, it automatically can use my Google account to grab the password that was saved with that. And it also saves your app passwords, which is nice. And I think Keychain does that as well on the Apple side too. But that saves a lot of time. It also has you can also have it generate passwords for you to simplify that you're creating more difficult passwords. And so if you make it easy to remember the passwords, then you're more apt to change them, and use different ones every place and change them regularly. And that's one thing I would make sure you do, especially with services that you use on a regular basis like Facebook or your email account. Don't just make a good password and turn on two-step verification and call it a day. You should be changing your password regularly too. I change my Facebook password like every 2 or 3 months. Because as a social media manager, I personally have access to about 85 different Facebook pages, right? And because I have access to all those pages, I am a security risk. because if somebody hacked my Facebook account, they could get to all of those pages. Yeah. So I'm very careful with my Facebook account.
Yeah, you're right though. You hear a lot of the stuff on the news, and some of it is news that may not be good information.
Well, and what it all comes down to is passwords. Because when you hear on the news like XYZ company had a security breach and 500,000 customers' personal information was compromised, right? And that's what you hear. It's like, oh, right.
Yeah.
What that usually means is somebody broke in, stole that information. The information can't be just used on its own. They've got to be able to get into something with it, right? They're trying to use that information to get passwords, right? Because people use easy passwords, and they usually use personal information to create the passwords. And so if they have the personal information, they can start guessing the passwords. Then that information, once they get it, they sell it on the dark web, right? And so people that are criminals on the dark web can buy very inexpensively, buy big blocks of data with people's personal information. That information usually contains passwords or ideas for passwords. And so so if you don't change your passwords often and use stuff use passwords that are easily guessable, they can use that personal information to figure out how to hack into your accounts.
Yeah, and this whole identity theft thing, is still out there. I don't think I hear as much about that, but it's all the same stuff, right? I mean,
yeah, to a point. I mean, credit card theft is a huge problem. It's such a huge problem that the credit card companies know that they can't. They're fighting an uphill battle too. I had one recently. I had an unrecognized charge on one of my accounts, and it was just like one charge for like $5. And that's usually what criminals will do if they get access to a credit card, they'll test it, right? So they will they'll try out the number and a couple of small things, and this has happened to me before, so I know this pattern. And then they'll go on a shopping spree once they're sure that it works. Right. Yeah. But this one I caught it was just like it was like a $5 charge or something. And it didn't even, I mean, it was made in Idaho or something. It wasn't even made here. It wasn't any place that I'd been. And so I just, I reported it to the credit card company, and all they did was, I reported it through their online interface, and all they did was take it off my account and say, here you go. Because the $5 is not worth their effort. Yeah. Because there's so much of that they have to deal with, and that's unfortunate. If you want to take the extra steps, a lot of credit card companies now have ways that they can issue unique card numbers for you to use for online shopping that change, so that you're not revealing your actual credit card number. So that's one option. Another thing you can use, which to a lot of people may sound scary, is Google Pay or Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or any of these pay things, right? I use Google Pay because I'm an Android guy, right? And so what that does is you register your forms of payment with your Google Pay account, and then that stuff ties into your phone and uses your phone as your access key, right? And the only way to access it is to be able to, now your phone has to be secure, right? So you got to have a good password on your phone so people can't get into your phone easily. And either have a good password or thumbprint, registration, or there are a number of ways you can do that to make it secure. But then you can, when you go to pay, anybody that has any merchant that supports Google Pay, you use your phone as your key, and one of the ways to do that is if your phone has what's called NFC. If your device is really close to something, like within about a half an inch, it can talk to it and exchange brief amounts of encrypted information. And so that's how Google Pay works. So like with my phone, I can go to a terminal that supports Google Pay, turn on Google Pay on my phone, so I have to unlock my phone with my access. And then once it's unlocked, then I can put my phone on the device that accepts the payment and it talks to my phone to authorize the payment. I actually have a watch that does that now too. So just because it's so difficult to lift up my phone, but they're actually linked together, so I couldn't access this without this, and so it's secure. But that's actually a very secure thing to do, because there is a two-step challenge process involved in that.
Yeah.
You have to have access to the key to make that work. It's better than having your credit card sitting out. So there are options for credit card security as well.
Email's another big issue. I'm at the office looking at emails all day long, and I'm seeing stuff that I don't recognize, and I don't know if that's a valid advertisement. How do they get my email? I probably get a couple of those every day, and then I can go in there and delete that. So you can talk about the terminology of what all that is, but essentially, it'll go to my trash instead of going into my inbox. But the fact of the matter is a lot of those, you do not want to click on anything in that email. You might read the email, but you don't want to click on anything, and it might entice you to click. Talk a little more,
Sure.
And that's called phishing, right?
Yeah, phishing with a PH, by the way.
PH, yeah.
Phishing.
Yeah.
And it's, first of all, let me start off with the goal of phishing has changed somewhat from what I understand. And there are still instances where the goal is to get you to click on something that's going to automatically download something to your computer, like malware or spy software or something like that. That's actually, from what I've been reading, that's not mostly what's happening now. The goal is to get you to click on something, to go someplace and try and get you to provide information, so then they can hack into your stuff.
Yeah.
That's more common now, from what I understand. But phishing has become a lot more sophisticated. There are people that are, they're professional criminals, and their job is to try and get your information so they can steal stuff from you. Mm-hmm. So some of them are very good at it, and as you saw from some of the scam episodes we did last season, these are people that are embarrassed, but it happened to them, and not because they weren't vigilant, but because the people that hit them up were good. It looked legit.
Yeah.
So you can't just assume that something that you open is safe. The general rule is, if you get an email that's got a link on it to click on for something, be very careful. Don't assume it's from the person you think it is. Check the email. I've had, here's an example. This is not email, but it's similar. So I had somebody recently that I got a text message from somebody that I knew from Facebook. So they sent me a Facebook message with a message that's something like, "Hey, this is really cool. Go check this out," with a link. And the link looked like LinkedIn, right? The URL that they used looked like LinkedIn, but I looked carefully at it, and it actually was not the LinkedIn shortener URL. Wow. It was very, very similar. The crooks made it similar enough that people would bite, but I looked at it and I was like, that's not right. And then I went back, and the person's Facebook account got hacked, and somebody was in there sending out messages to all their friends trying to get them to click on the link, and it was a phishing link. So that's the type of stuff you're dealing with oftentimes now. When you get an email, unless first of all, nobody is ever going to ask you for personal information through a link in your email. Nobody will do that. That's legit. So just don't do it. If somebody says click this thing to log into your account, just go to the site and log in. It's just as easy. Yeah. Just resist that temptation to just click links, because that's where a lot of this phishing stuff comes from.
Yeah. And then the ransomware, you might get one of those.
You
never know what might pop up.
Ransomware is the average person, the average individual is not going to be worrying about ransomware. Because again, these are criminals. The criminals are out to make money, right? And they're out to hit
businesses.
targets that they can make a lot of money
Yeah.
off of.
Yeah.
But the way that ransomware gets started is 90+% of the time, I've read this recently, is bad passwords. End user bad passwords, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they fish off of, try to fish people's emails to get somebody to bite, so then they can get in through the bad passwords and get into the network and install their ransomware virus.
Yeah.
So that's almost always the breach is through bad passwords, and this is what drives IT administrators crazy, because they can do all the stuff they can to make everything as safe and protected as possible, and it just takes one end user with a bad password to blow the whole system.
Wow. We're living in interesting times. It's a real technical world out there.
Yeah, and and that's part of why this can be difficult is that the technology is intimidating to a lot of people. I mean, and I think especially to seniors because I didn't grow up with it, but to a lot of people, and people are embarrassed to admit that they don't know too, which is the other thing.
Yeah.
But people of all ages are at risk, not just seniors, and because the technology is intimidating, it's a way to get people flustered so that they'll make bad choices. So
These
you
are
have
smart
to just
people.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, they're professional criminals and they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you just have to. The most important thing to remember is that locked door. It's a locked door analogy, right? Did I mention this at the beginning?
Yeah.
I can't remember. So when you've got a car prowler in a parking lot, right? A parking lot full of cars. They're not gonna go try to break into cars that are locked. The first thing they're gonna do is try and find unlocked doors, because all they gotta do is open the door and take the stuff out. And the alarm's not set, so that's easy. So if you lock your car, it's harder to get in. Same thing with your house. I mean, you wouldn't leave your house with the doors unlocked and the windows wide open and the lights on so people can see that you're not there.
Yeah.
I mean, taking basic security precautions. I mean, putting an ADT sign in front of your house is, if I were a burglar and I saw the sign, even if I didn't have an ADT system, is the criminal going to want to take the risk if they think that there's an alarm system? No, they'll go next door to where the door's open. So anything you can do to create barriers to make it harder makes you less likely to be a target.
And there's a lot of things we can do to do that.
And there's a lot of simple things you can do. And the most simple of those is passwords. You got to take care of those passwords. Use a password manager. Use complex passwords, and change them often. And 99% of computer security is that.
With that, I want to thank you, Russ, for spending some time with us today. And I think this is really good information for everybody, not just seniors. And, we just need to be aware of what you can do to improve your security. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.